Hi, hello YouTube land. My name's James. I'm from Evolution Motors Limited. We specialise in EV cars, but also I like to sell some small eco combustion engine cars as well because I love cars. So that brings me nicely on to talking under the bonnet of a Fiat 500 Twin Air. Now, the reason I'm making this video is because I could not find any videos on YouTube or any proper guides of how to bleed the Fiat Twin Air 900cc UK master cylinder slave cylinder. So let's get right down to it then. Now, I changed the slave cylinder and the master cylinder because the slave cylinder was completely dead and the master cylinder had a small weep in it. I changed the slave cylinder first, and there was actually a gap of about a week because I was waiting for parts. So I changed the slave cylinder, no issues whatsoever. There's a little 3mm Allen key and you bleed out of a bleed nipple. Everything's absolutely fine, no issues. The slave bled fine. Now, the master cylinder I thought would also be straightforward, and it really wasn't. On the bigger engined 500s, 1.2s, 1.4s, they have a separate reservoir for the clutch, but this car shares the reservoir with the brake system, which is just here. So, what's the issue? Well, too much air gets trapped when you change the master. Too much air gets trapped in the system. It's got this I call it the sort of curly pig's tail corkscrew system, which goes, this end here attaches to the reservoir, and then it goes along the back of the bulkhead, and this end here attaches to the master cylinder. Okay, all good, absolutely perfect. But the problem is, in that sort of curly pigtail system, a lot of air gets trapped, and air also gets trapped in the master cylinder itself. So you think to yourself, well, I'll tell you what, I'll pump the pedal 1,000 times, it'll all eventually work its way out to the slave cylinder. Guess what? It doesn't. So you think, okay, I've got a power bleeder, the ones where you attach the air line to like a spare tyre, attach it to the cap of your reservoir, and you pump about 20 psi of pressure into the system, and you think, yep, that will blow all the air out. Yeah, guess what? It doesn't. So what I actually did was, it's on the bonnet. I attached the cap that comes with the power bleeder system to my air gun, to the air duster, and I just attached it with a bit of tube and taped it all up. And it didn't really, it didn't leak any air, so that was great. And I only put the compressor up to 30 psi. Anything more than 30 psi is probably silly because you'll end up blowing a seal. Even 30 psi is potentially too high. And I've also read a few sort of forum links where people have put their compressor up to 60 psi to try and pump it through. I wouldn't really recommend that. On the power bleeder itself, on the Gunson power bleeder, it actually says 20 psi. I went to 30. You can do what you feel you need to do. Now, I did not get anywhere even pumping in 30 psi from a compressor. So it was sort of pressurise it up with the compressor and leak it out of the bleed nipple, pump it up with the compressor, leak it out of the bleed nipple, obviously tightening up the bleed nipple in between the pumps. Nothing. Pedal was still like floppy as. So what did I do? Well, I deleted the factory hose, the one with the curly pigtail line. Deleted it, replaced it with a bit of I think it was 8mm petrol hose, brand new petrol hose. Sorry if it goes a bit loud, I've got a train going past. I'll keep talking small. So replace it with petrol hose. I mean, it's rubber hose, it's fine. If it's good for petrol, it's fine for clutch fluid. And what that did was, it was just a straight line, so from the reservoir, straight, direct line to the master cylinder, and I deleted that the curly whirly pigtail element of it because I believe that was trapping it. No, again, I'm not recommending this is what you do. I'm just telling you what I did to solve the problem. So replace that. So Yep, this thing, gone. In the bin. No good, didn't like it. Then what I did was, and this is recommended for quite a lot of cars, is on the slave cylinder, I actually, I clamped it closed with a G-clamp. This is a G-clamp to the uninitiated. Okay, this isn't the clutch slave cylinder, this is the actual master. It's a nasty plastic thing. I replaced it with like a nice chunky metal thing. So I'm going to demonstrate on the master cylinder, but we need to pretend that this is the slave cylinder. Okay, so what I did was I used a G-clamp and clamped I clamped the piston closed with the G-clamp. I think I went from the bolt to the sort of the arm where the slave cylinder meets the gearbox. I clamped it closed. I clamped the slave cylinder closed. Now the bleed nipple still works because that sort of the bleed nipple was sort of here, so it doesn't matter that you've closed the piston up at all. The slave cylinder or the bleed nipple still works absolutely fine. So I clamped the slave cylinder, which is down underneath the battery, which I'll just show you now quickly. Yeah, so there's the battery. You've got to take out the battery, you've got to take out the ECU, there's a couple of bolts. The battery tray is really not hard. It's about 3 to 4 bolts. You undo the battery, positive, negative first, then positive. Okay, underneath there is the slave cylinder. You can't really see it from where I am now. Perhaps it's a bad example. Perhaps I should have just taken out the battery to show you, but I didn't. So you clamp the slave cylinder with a G-clamp, or even if you've got like a bit of strap, a little mini ratchet strap or something. And again, the reason you do that is so that the air you're trying to pump out of the master doesn't then go down the line, find its way into the slave cylinder, and it just sits in the sort of the piston, the cylinder inside the slave cylinder, and then it just remains in there and doesn't bleed out. So yeah, so I closed up the slave cylinder, and then what I did was actually I had the master cylinder, which is actually this thing here, unbolted, not bolted to the bulkhead, loose in my hand. Slave cylinder clamped or strapped down. Didn't need the pressure bleeder. Okay, so I just made sure it's full of the reservoir was full of fluid. I replaced that line, and I had it. The hose was attached to here, how it should be, and the slave cylinder line as well was also attached to here, how it should be. And because I had the master cylinder sort of raised up, I could control where the air bubble was inside it, basically. So I was pumping the master cylinder by hand. So it's a pump. So I do one pump, crack off the bleed nipple, then tighten up the bleed nipple on the slave cylinder, give it another pump, crack the nipple. Okay, give it another pump, crack the nipple. I think you see where this is going. I probably did that about 10 times. Oh, one thing I was missing actually. I'll tell you what I did. Actually, this is quite an important step, and I should have told you this first. So when I put the new line, the bit of hose pipe on, when I did that, I actually pre-filled it with a syringe with clutch fluid, brake fluid, same thing, .4. I pre-filled it till it was brimmers, absolutely brimmed to the top. This is the piece of hose. So the reservoir, that was full, and the hose, I manually filled it with a syringe with clutch fluid, so that there was like no chance of any air in it at all. And actually, I even pre-filled like this with fluid as well. I squirted a bit of fluid in here, so there was just like the absolute minimum amount of air possibly that there could be in the system. So then I attached the hose on, okay, and then I did the pump, release the pressure, pump, release the pressure, pump, release the pressure. And eventually this stiffened up, so I was like, okay, I think I've got most of it. I couldn't push it with my hand. I'm not Superman anyway. Couldn't push it with my hand. I just reattached it to 2 bolts, reattached it to the pedal, so then it was all back in, the system was in how it should be. And then I got my mate to pump the pedal with his foot, Again, cracked the bleed nipple, and then I just did it until there was no air and just fluid coming through, how you normally do these things, and it worked. And that is how I did it. So just to recap them, so I refilled the reservoir till it was brimmers. I replaced the standard hose with a hose that was just a bit of brand new petrol line. I think it was 8mm. Filled that hose and the reservoir to full, attached it to the master cylinder, and the slave cylinder was attached to its part as well. So obviously we have the reservoir fluid coming in, and then the pressurised fluid going out to the slave cylinder. Another important step was I clamped with a G-clamp. That's a G-clamp. I clamped the slave cylinder so that it could not move. It was just clamped in place. The piston couldn't move. It was in the closed position. Had the master cylinder in my hand. It was up nice and high as well. That was pre-filled with fluid. I pumped it with my hand, cracked off the pressure, then redid the 3mm Allen key up, pumped some pressure, cracked off the pressure, just went through that until this got really stiff, couldn't move it by hand, and then bolted it back onto the bulkhead, got a mate to pump it, and that was it. Then we bled in the normal way. So I'm not saying that you have to replace the standard curly-whirly pigtail Fiat hose. I'm not saying you have to, but that's what I did because it made it shorter and there was less chance of having air getting trapped in it. That was my method and it worked, and I've got a beautiful clutch. Thanks a lot for listening. If this has been helpful, please feel free to say thumbs up in the comments. If you think I've done something wrong, also do that in the comments, and we'll have a discussion about the rights and wrongs of car maintenance. But thanks for watching. Cheers, goodbye.